Waymaker,
Yes.
miracle worker,
Yes.
promise keeper,
Yes.
light in the darkness. That is who he is. You know that's a preacher's song, that is. You come off that. I could just do it next 30 minutes, 45 minutes. We'd be happy. We'd go home. We'd be all right. Father, thank you for your goodness, for your grace, for your mercy, for your loving kindness. Thank you that we can be here today and with each other. And as we spend our time together, we just pray that through our talk today and through our discussion afterwards, you will speak to us, you will challenge us, and you will change us and help shape us into the kind of people you've called us to be, the kind of people that are full of love, full of hope, full of joy. In Jesus' name. And everyone said, Amen. Amen. So we are recording our services now, and we're going straight to Facebook Live. So I am live. What we're doing, so we're only recording the talk part of the service. So when we get to the discussion afterwards, please don't feel inhibited to have a free discussion. I know some of you wouldn't be, but we'll be cutting it off as we finish. All right, today we're going to be talking about the tale of the talents, and I'm going to direct your attention to Matthew 25. I'm sorry, that was really small text, so those of you with good eyesight can read it. The rest of you just have to trust me as I read it. No, I'm telling you this, yeah? And the Bible says, For it is as a man going on a journey, summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. He gave one 5 talents, and another 2, and another 1, each according to his ability. Everyone say ability. Ability. Then he went away, and the one who had received 5 talents went off and traded with them and made 5 more talents. And in the same way, the one who had 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. And after a long time, the master of those slaves came back and settled accounts with them. And the one who had received 5 talents came forth, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 talents more. And his master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trusted in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one who had 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed me 2 talents. See, I have made you 2 more talents. And his master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You've been trusted in a few things, and I will put you in charge in many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And then the one who had received 1 talent. Now, if you follow the pattern here, they're all making 100% profit. So 5 turns it into 10. 10 turns it into 5 turns it into 10. Sorry. 10 turns it into 20, and you'd think the 1 turns it into 2, but he comes forward and he says, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you did not scatter seed, and so I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I didn't sow, and gather where I did not scatter? And then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what is my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with 10 talents, for all those who have more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But all those who have nothing, even what they will have, will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And everyone said, Amen. Amen. I've got a confession to make this morning. A confession. And that confession is that sometimes, in fact, just lately, and not more often, I read parts of the Bible that I've read for years. And sometimes I begin to understand them less and less. And the more I look into different understandings and different commentaries, the more I become unclear about what that particular text is saying to me. Now, that's probably not the best thing for a preacher or a pastor to tell you on a Sunday morning. But there you have it. I said it. And it's on Facebook Live as well. So probably all my invites to go out and speak, they're all gone, all out the window. And even though I've looked at this text loads of times, and I've preached this text over the last 20 years, loads and loads of times, I looked at this text this week, and I've got problems with it. I've got problems with it. Because in this text, the master, normally when we talk about the master, we associate the master with God, don't we? The master in this text is an angry, exploitative master who is happy to take away from the one who has nothing and cast that one into outer darkness because he did not get the return that he wanted. Boom, there it is. And as I was sort of reading through this again and just researching and studying, one of the things that became clear to me in this parable is that when you look at this parable, actually we shouldn't look at this parable in isolation of itself. Actually, this parable should be looked into, it should be read with the parable that comes before it, which is the parable of the 10 bridesmaids, and the parable and the narrative that goes after it, which we spoke about last year, which is the sheep and the goat. And there are different interpretations of this text. There was one interpretation that I got quite interested in. There was one interpretation that actually the hero of this text was the third slave, because he was counter-culture, and he went against what the ruthless, evil master wanted him to do, the sort of money-centric ways of the master. And that kind of resonated with me as I was reading it. I was getting quite excited as I was reading that. But as I read the text, that didn't quite fully resonate with how I understand this text currently and how I understand this text today. And this text for me is quite a challenging text. It's one of these texts where we have to dig deep. It's one of these texts where we have to consider it carefully to fully understand what it's telling us. Do you know one of the problems that we have with Scripture and that we have with parables and so forth? One of the problems that we have is that we only ever understand these parables and we only ever understand these texts as a third party to them. We don't live in the culture in which they were written. We don't live in the culture in which they were said. It's like when people say today, "That's wicked, man." I know people don't say that today. but when people, and we use language that we understand within our context and culture. Can you imagine someone quoting some of the stuff we say today? And, well, wicked means bad, but in that context, it doesn't actually mean bad. Sick, and all of these other terms we have. And I think the same is true of the parables, and the same is true of the entire Scripture. We're so far removed from that culture, it's difficult for us to fully comprehend what was fully meant by those stories, by those Scriptures. And the other thing is that we're so far removed, and we have limited resources. They didn't have Facebook back then. They didn't have computers back then. A lot of the works that would have helped us fully understand this text better have been lost over time. And there's an author, speaker, philosopher, and radical theologian by the name of Pete Rollins, and he really helps me out on this. He really does. Pete Rollins says this: the parable is given to us, but at the same time, it's full of wealth, meaning which will never fully be mined. It's not reducible to some clear, singular, scientific formula, but rather gives rise to a multitude of commentaries. In opposition to this, many Christian communities view the stories and the parables of the Bible as raw material to be translated into a single, understandable meaning, rather than an experience as infinitely rich treasures that can speak to us in a plurality of ways. And I love that. I love that. But when we look at these parables, we need to experience them as infinitely rich treasures that can speak to us in the plurality, I can't even say that word this morning, plurality of ways. And I think as we look at these texts, as we look at these parables, it's so important for us to understand that. I love that these texts will speak to us in different ways at different times. So anyway, back to the parable. Sorry, I just diverted there and shared with you my journey of understanding this text today. But let's get back to the parable. And there's a couple of points I want to make about this parable. The first point I want to make about this parable, and about actually the parable that comes before it, the 10 bridesmaids, and about the sheep and goat narrative that comes after it, is that this text is not about salvation. Tell somebody it's not about salvation. Usually when we look at this text, we use it to talk about who's in and who's out. Who makes it to that afterlife place called heaven, and who goes to the other place, the warm place. I think that as we look at this parable, and as we look at this text, we need to think beyond that. We need to think beyond the traditional who's in and who's out sort of view of it. And we need to look beyond the idea of just salvation. The second thing I think it's important to recognise about this text is that as Pete Rowling said, we like to reduce a parable to a single clear formula. Usually along the lines that the master is God, we are the slaves, and this is how we need to interpret this text in its entirety. And while some parables are simple to understand, I don't think this parable is that simple in that context. Because guess what? The master for me doesn't resonate with who I understand God to be. For me, this idea that God is a ruthless, unreasonable master who only is concerned about his return on his investment, or that we can somehow earn or buy our salvation, that doesn't fully resonate with me. So when we look at this text, we need to just think beyond these sort of traditional ways in which we understand it. The third thing I want to say about this text, this parable is not about money. Tell somebody it's not about money.
It's not about money.
It's not about money. And oftentimes when we look at this parable, and we will do this today, is we relate this parable to our gifts, to our talents, and our abilities. But tell somebody it goes deeper than that. It goes deeper than that. And we will look at this. I think there's a challenge in this text that goes beyond just how we use our gifts, talents, and abilities. And then the fourth thing I think is true about this parable is that this parable shouldn't be separated and isolated from the parable before it and the sheep and the goats narrative that comes after it. We need to understand this chapter as a whole. And so that's where we begin. We start with the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. Everyone say 10 bridesmaids. 10 bridesmaids, not 10 brides, by the way. Do you know how long, for years, I understood that parable as 10 brides going to meet one groom? It's amazing the stuff that just lives in our head and we never question it. No, this is a parable of 10 bridesmaids who are going out with the bride to meet the groom. And what I understand about the context of this parable and the way Jewish weddings happened at the time is Jewish weddings, you would have a betrothal. That's where a guy would meet a girl and say, I want to marry you. Or say to her parents, I want to marry you. And then there would be the acceptance of that request or that betrothal. And what the groom would do, the groom would then leave the bride and her family, and he would go back to where he came from, to his father's house. And if he was rich enough, his father would own some kind of complex, and he would build a home for his bride-to-be, in which when he returned for his bride, He would take her to that home. And some of you may realize that resonates with some of the things that Jesus said. He says, my Father's house has many mansions, and if I go to prepare a place for you, and I will come again. And the whole language there is about marriage. The whole language there is about marriage. And so what the groom would do, the groom would be away, building this house, and he would come back, and the bride wouldn't know exactly when he would come back. And she would have her bridesmaids, in this story it's 10 bridesmaids, who would be waiting with her, waiting eagerly, waiting prepared for the groom to come. And what used to happen, I'm told, in Jewish weddings, is that Jewish weddings of that era happened at night. Everyone say night. And so the groom would come at night, and the bridesmaid's job was to look out for the groom. And when they saw the groom coming, they would blow, I think it's called a shofar, a horn. And all the bridesmaids would get up, they'd light their lamps, and they'd go out to meet the groom. And they would take the groom back to the bride. And then the bride and the groom, they would take them to the wedding tent. And the wedding tent was where they consummated the marriage. And so the bridesmaids would wait outside the wedding tent. And once the consummation of the marriages happened, they'd go back to the families and tell everybody they're married. The marriage has happened. Now, bit weird for me, you know. I'm not going to lie, bit weird, waiting outside, you know. But not our time, not our culture, people. That's all right. And so the job of the bridesmaids was to be ready. It was one to make sure the wedding took place at night, so they needed oil that would last them the entire night to go out, meet the bride, bring him back, wait while the marriage was consummated, and then go back to the family. They needed oil for that all time. So they had to, one, make sure they had enough oil, and two, they had to make sure that they used the oil wisely so that it lasted the entire night. And so they would trim their lamps accordingly. And I think when we look at that part of this whole story, is about challenging us to be ready. Tell somebody, be ready.
Be ready.
You know, if I was T.D. Jakes now, I'd do get ready. Be ready. Be prepared. And I think there's a challenge here for us as God's kingdom, as bridesmaids, if you like, in God's kingdom, to be ready for what God is about to do, to be on the lookout for what God is about to do, to be ready to do what we're supposed to do, to bear witness in that time of what God is doing. And I think there's a challenge here about us being able to bear witness through our lives and through everything that we're doing. There's a challenge for us to make sure we're stocked up. Tell somebody, get stocked up. Use what you have wisely and sensibly. How many of you know that resources are finite? Tell somebody they run out. Tell somebody your time, it runs out. Your money, if you're not careful, will run out. Your gifts, your talents, if you will burn yourself out if you're not wise in what you do. At least says amen. No, sorry. Private joke. Yeah, we're having a discussion in the car. Yeah. Don't just hate it when that's your message. Journey home's going to be under a bit, but there you go. And so we have to be prepared, we have to be ready. And so then what happens is Jesus moves into the parable of the talents. And the parable of the talents is interesting. It's stitched on the back of the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. And it's totally unrelated. It's like Jesus just picks another story and tells a different story. But what you find, whilst the story itself is unrelated, the outcomes and the context and what's being communicated is not unrelated. There's a resonance running through this chapter. And so this parable is set in the context of a ruthless, unreasonable, uncompromising master. And I think when Jesus tells story, he tells them deliberately.
Yeah.
He chooses characters deliberately because he's trying to communicate something to his followers. This master is interested in one thing: business transactions. This master is interested in getting a return on his investment. This master is a no-nonsense, no-excuse master. You know, those of you that watch The Apprentice, this is the Alan Sugar, you're fired, master. And therefore, when we look at the lesson of this parable, the lesson of this parable is not who is God. The lesson of this parable is not what type of God we serve. The lesson of this parable is not what is the nature of salvation or what does salvation look like. No. The message of this parable is about resources. It's about commitment. It's about responsibility. It's about what you do with what you have. Put your hand on your chest and say, me. My stuff. It's about what you do with your stuff. In this story, the master summons 3 slaves. Now notice, this is a master-slave relationship. Everyone say master. Everyone say slave. This is a master-slave relationship. And again, I don't think this fully reflects the relationship that we're called to have with God. And the nature of our relationship with God. I don't think it fully. There are parallels there, but I don't think it fully reflects. So these 3 people are slaves. That means they have no choice. That means they are not volunteering. That means they are not being asked, will you take my money and invest it? No. They are being told. And their job is to simply respond to the requests of their master. Whether they're reasonable or unreasonable, whether they're ruthless or not, that is their job, to do their master's bidding. Now each of these 3 slaves are given a sum of money. And the text tells us something really important. We're going to come back and visit this a bit later. But it's according to their ability. Yeah. Everyone say ability. Ability. And that's really important. Now, this master is a shrewd master. He is an investor. He's a money maker. Have you ever met a money maker? A money maker don't make decisions flippantly or light. They make decisions carefully and considered and calculated and deliberately, and they make it because they want a deliberate outcome. This is not the kind of master that says, well, which 3 slaves am I going to pick today? Eeny, meeny, miny. No. This is the kind of master that knows his people, knows what they can do, knows what they can't do. These are tried and tested people that he handpicks to get the outcome that he wants. To one slave, he gives 5. To another 2, and another 1. And what we find here is that he does it in order to get the best return. Everyone say best return. Now, how many of you know a talent is a lot of money? Tell somebody a talent's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. According to Wikipedia, okay? According to Wikipedia, I don't even have it here. Well, according to Wikipedia, and I know not everything you read on Wikipedia is true, but if Wikipedia is believed to be true in this instance, a talent is a unit of currency that's worth about 600 denarii. A denarii was the usual payment for a day's labour. And at 1 denarius per day, a single talent was worth 16 years of labour. Okay? So 10 talents was about 4.8 million pounds. 5 talents was 2.4 million pounds. And 1 talent, 1 measly talent, was £500,000. Now, what it was worth then and what it was worth now really doesn't matter. What the story is trying to communicate is they were not given something light. They were not given something minimum. Even the one that got 1 talent was not given a small thing. They were given a large amount of money. Something that it would take someone 16 years earn. And what the other thing I want you to remember, they're not being paid salary here. This is not their money. This is money that they are given to invest. Okay? And what happens, the master goes away, and when he returns sometimes later, he comes back, and one of them says, I took what you gave me, and I doubled it. Yes. Second one comes back, and he received less, but had the same outcome. I took what you gave me, and I doubled it. And so we see the return on investment is around 100%. But however, the one that was given 1 talent comes back, and he comes back with an excuse that, I knew you were unreasonable. I knew you were uncompromising. I knew you wouldn't take any excuse, so I'm not going to give you it. Here's your money back. I buried it, I put it in a hole, I buried it, and I've kept it nice and safe for you. Here you go, have it back, just as you gave it to me. Now, and this is why the characters of this story are important. To the ruthless, everyone say ruthless. Uncompromising, everyone say uncompromising. Master, this is a complete waste of time and money. Why would I give you something just to give it back if what I expected was a return on my investment? And so then we have your Alan Sugar moment. You're fired. Now this parable throws out a number of points to me today, and I want to just leave these points with you. The first thing that this parable lets me know, it lets me know today that I stand here today in a group of immensely talented and able people. Surrounding me on 3 sides this morning are a group of people that are richly endowed with talents. And guess what? You are able. Tell someone you're able. You're able. I want you to remember that when you go to your audition tomorrow. You are able. You are able. You have got what it takes to do something awesome with the stuff that you have been given. And so this parable is about the part that you will play in God's kingdom. It's about what you're going to do with the stuff that God has given you, that life has given you, that you've been richly blessed with. You're a talented person. And I think there's an important context in this story. It doesn't matter whether you get 10 talents or 1 talent. It doesn't matter whether I'm the one and you lot are all the 10. That doesn't matter. What matters is that I have a talent and that I am able to do something with that talent. I don't know what's going on in the head of this fictional slave, and I don't think we're meant to, because I think we're meant to ask questions. But maybe he was too busy looking at the other people that got more than him. Yes. Too busy comparing himself amongst his contemporaries. And then, because he only got 1, was disillusioned with the whole thing and did nothing with it. And one of the things I want to let you know today is that we're not here to compare ourselves amongst ourselves. One of the things I learned very early on in life, there are always people that are better than you, smarter than you, brighter than you. They will earn more than you. They may make more money than you. They may be even better looking than you. Maybe. Not like me, but... See, I got that pride as a talent. But they're not you. And they can't do what you're called to do. And they can't be who you're called to be. And they can't have the impact and make the change and be the blessing to their world that you are called to be. In fact, it doesn't matter how much more you have than me. You can't do what I'm called to do in the context which I'm called. So it's pointless. It's a pointless exercise. It's a worthless exercise. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. And I think maybe that was going on in this third slave, looking at what everybody else has got, not realizing the wealth and the richness that he had within his hands and the ability that he had to do something with it. I want you to understand today that your gifts, your talents, and your abilities should be understood within the context of who you're called to be, not within the context of who everybody else is and what they're doing. Put your hand on your chest and say me. My benchmark is who God is calling me to be. My benchmark is the potential that I've got within me. And I know we like to measure, sometimes we spur each other on, and all of that is good. But you're not my benchmark. My benchmark is who God. My benchmark is the passion that lives inside of me. This is why we can sit down there judging people. Well, you're not making as much as that person. And we make all of these selfish judgments about things. But are they happy? Are they doing what they're called to do? Are they doing the thing that sets them on fire? Are they doing the thing that they love getting up for on a Monday morning and going out to do? Are they doing the things that make them who they are? They're the questions that we need to be asking. And we need to look at our context in terms of who we are and who God has called us to be. In fact, that's your only measuring stick, who God has called you to be.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I want you to understand today, one is not less valuable than 5 or 10. And your gifts, your talents, and your ability. We live in a money-centric world where there are certain things that clearly make more money than other things. But guess what? Just because what you've been given may not make as much money as everybody else, it is no less valuable. I want you to understand the community needs it. The neighbourhood needs it. The people around you need you with your gifts, with your talents, with your abilities. They need what you have. Regardless of how people compare it with everybody else. It's not less valuable. You know, I've seen people with silver spoons in their mouths. I've seen people that had the world at their feet, and I've seen people with nothing and do more with that perceive nothing than other people have done with all the stuff that they've had. The second thing I want you to understand from this is that whether you believe it or not, right now you are able. You are able. You've been given according to your ability. That means you've been tried and tested. That means all of the stuff that you've got, you can do something with it. And I know sometimes in life, and you know, I've struggled with imposter syndrome and all kinds of different things. And sometimes in life, even when you don't believe you're able, you've got to believe that He's able too. Yes. And that's what our faith calls us to do. And so what I want to call you today is I want to call you to believe in yourself. Put your hand on your chest and say me. You know, sometimes we think, well, God wants us to believe in Him. Yes, He does. But He wants us to also believe in ourselves. God wants you to believe in you, in who He's called you to be, in what He's given you. Okay? And so I'm calling you today to believe in who you are. Believe in yourself. I'm calling you today to ignore the negative reports and the negative statements. You can go further. And that's not a negative report. That's good stuff. Especially if it's coming from someone who loves you and cares for you and is your cheerleader. That's good stuff. But all that negative stuff, those negative reports, those things that people want to look down and tell you that you can't or you cannot, you've got to ignore that stuff. The next thing I want you to tell you about this parable is this parable tells us that if we don't use it, you know, just do more of it. Or even do it better, even though we will. But how many of you know our gifts, our talents and abilities, they grow, they evolve, they change. Value multiplies from them. There is something about when when we use our stuff, they evolve into something different. You are an evolving creation. You are doing stuff today, and you've got to use it today because that is going to help you do something different tomorrow. There is something about using your abilities and allowing them to appreciate and evolve. And there's a step you need to make tomorrow, but you can only make it if you use the stuff that you have today. There is stuff I'm doing in my life now that I never dreamed of doing. If I wrote my dreams down from 20 years ago, New Year's Day, 20 years ago, yes, the stuff I wanted to be, you'd look at it and think, wow. Because they were limited to what I understood and what I knew and what I could do at the time. But over time, I've used my stuff, and it's grown, and I've come beyond what I could have imagined back at that time. There is stuff you will do tomorrow, and you will only be able to do them tomorrow because of today. And I think what this parable is about is not so much about the master taking the stuff away from the slave, but I think it's communicating that when we don't use our stuff, it depreciates and we lose it. Take £100 and put it under your mattress. Okay? £100 under your mattress today. And I guarantee that in 5 years' time, that £100 will not be able to buy you the equivalent of what it can buy today. Right. Because money depreciates, cost of living goes up, inflation happens, and all of those things. And that money that's sat there and doing nothing is becoming less and less valuable. And it's the same is true of our gifts, talents, and abilities. If we don't use them, when we get to tomorrow, they'll be irrelevant. Because we did nothing with them today. The next thing I want to say about this parable that it helps me understand, it tells me about opportunity. Everybody say opportunity. And the reward of taking risks. Everyone say risks. Yes. Now the problem with the third slave, he said, I was afraid. And there's a key to his mindset there. He was afraid of failures. He was afraid of taking risks. Do you know it would have been better for him to take that money and do something and lose it, and come back and say, well, I invested it and the market's failed. And so I haven't got anything, but I did my best. It would have been better for him to do that than to come back and say nothing. They say no opportunity only knocks once, and sometimes that can be true. Sometimes we're lucky in life, and we get second and third opportunities. But this parable is about opportunities, and it's about understanding that there's no guarantee that opportunity is going to come again tomorrow. You know, in life, we've got to learn how to seize the opportunity, seize the moment, take that opportunity we see today and do something with it today. Did you know there are doors that are opening up for you that only you can walk through? That's right. And if you will just take the risk of walking through, there's something on the other side of that door that's specially waiting for you. But you won't get it if you don't see the opportunity and take the risk of going for that opportunity. You won't get it. And so the slave in this text, he did the easiest thing possible, which is to do nothing. How many of you have ever done nothing in your life? And you realise it's the easiest thing. Just put it out of mind. Out of sight, out of mind. Put it back there somewhere. And just forget about it. But this text is about that opportunity. I'm finishing now, but as I've talked about this parable, I've related it to our gifts, our talents, and our abilities. And I think that's good. I think that's a good application of the text. But I think it goes deeper. Tell somebody it goes deeper. And remember I said that you can only understand this text when we then understand it in the context of the sheep and goat narrative. Sheep and goat narrative is where at the end the sheep are called and the goats are called. And he rewards the sheep because he says, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. And they said, when did we do that? And he said, when you did it to the least of these. You see, there's clues in this text about what this parable is really all about. And then he said to the goats, you don't get rewarded because you never did any of those things. And they said, well, when did we not do it? He said, well, when you saw the least of these and didn't do it to them, you didn't do it to me. And the understanding this is right there within is right there. Understanding this parable is right there when we grapple with what the sheep and goat means, and what it ultimately means. Ultimately, this text is about mission. Tell somebody mission. It's about our mission to see the divine in the least of these. It's about our mission to see God in the people around us. It's about our mission to serve those on the edges and the fringes of society. It's about our mission to go to those that nobody else is going to, and to care for those that nobody else is to caring for, and to make our world the kind of place where we don't forget about the outcasts, we don't forget about the downtrodden, but we work to make our world a better place. And there's something I found, found as I was researching this, and I just want to share it with you. It's a Catholic priest by the name of Robert Shoestein. And he says this, he says, a talent in ancient time was a measure of something particularly weighty, usually silver or gold. A single talent might represent as much as 50 pounds of precious metal, and as such was not something that one carried around in his pocket. Okay, so what he's saying here is that you didn't carry around talents lightly. Tell somebody they were heavy. What the contemporary reader will likely miss, and what ancient Jewish readers would have caught immediately, is the connection to heaviness. A talent was weighty, and 5 talents was massively heavy. Heaviness would have brought to mind the heaviest weight of all, which was the kabod of Yahweh. The term was rendered in the Greek as doxia and Latin as gloria, both of which carried the connotations of luminosity. But the basic sense of the Hebrew word is heaviness and gravitas. And this kabod of Yahweh was to be found in the Jewish temple, resting on the mercy seat within the holiest of holies. And therefore, what was heaviest, most glorious of all, was the mercy of God, which abided in infinite, inexhaustible abundance in the holy temple. This talent is about carrying heavy stuff. It's about weighty things. And when we get to the sheep and the goat narrative, the sheep and the goat narrative is ultimately, how do we carry around the mercy of God in our life? How do we carry around the grace of God? And when you follow the theme through the text, it's are we ready to carry around the grace of God? The grace of God. Are we prepared to carry around the mercy of God? The parable of the talents asks us, what are you going to do with the mercy that God has given you? What are you going to do with the grace that God has given you? This is about where we carry it and to whom we carry it. And I want to leave you 4 questions and then I'm done. But the 4 questions I want to leave you today is the mercy and the grace of God is caught up in the whole of who you are. Everything in who you are. And I'm going to ask you, what are you going to do with the stuff that you have? Put your hand on your chest and say, my stuff. I want to ask you the question, are you going to make the burden and the heaviness of carrying it worth it? This is about carrying the heaviness of God and making sure that that is worth it. And it's only worth it if we do something with what we have. I want to ask you, what is our attitude to mission? Is it something we cared about it? Or is it something like the 3rd slave that we're happy to do nothing about? Put it in the back of our mind. Bury it in a hole. I'm blessed and highly favoured. I'm going to go to church and sing songs and speak in tongues every now and then and do all the things that I do, and I'm going to get happy and clappy and I'll have a breakthrough every now and then. Am I just going to bury it in a hole? Or am I going to do something with my life that makes a difference in the world that I live in? And the final question I want to ask is, how responsible resources. Tell somebody the stuff you've got is kingdom resources. Every gift, talent and ability you have is kingdom resources. The stuff that God has blessed you with is kingdom resources. And therefore you need to be responsible for what you've been doing. God bless you.